Citizens, we interrupt your normally scheduled programming to bring you an emergency broadcast. This broadcast has been developed to both entertain and educate you in preparedness and survival skills. Please stay tuned. Your very life may depend on it.
All right, here we go again with another episode of Zulu Alpha. Welcome back to my partner in crime here, Myles. How are you today?
Oh, I am doing quite all right, my friend. And I've got here for my whiskey of the week, my current favorite American rye. This is called Tin Cup, so called because it comes with a nice tin shot glass or sugar. So I'm going to pour myself a glass. I'm going to enjoy this as we do the podcast. Those of you that are watching this on Patreon are going to get to enjoy watching Myles and Joe get a little bit buzzed every week. So, tasting notes. Ooh, okay. A little bit of caramel, a little bit of vanilla on the nose. Tobacco. I think that's some tobacco leaf. Yeah, definitely tobacco and very heavy on the vanilla. Very smooth. I'm enjoying this on ice. There is no right or wrong way to enjoy whiskey. The right or wrong way to enjoy whiskey is the way that you do. As an individual, that I highly recommend Tin Cup. You can even buy this at like a Safeway or Fry's or whatever your local grocery store is called. Piggly Wiggly for those of you on the East Coast, right? There you go. It's actually pretty high proof. It's like 52%, which is pretty good for a whiskey. So it'll get you buzzed a little bit quicker. But it's delicious. It's very smooth. They say that it's distilled down with Rocky Mountain water, so I can definitely taste the anti-Second Amendment flavors, but it is still a great American rye.
Where is that distilled?
Durango, Colorado.
Cool. So what have you been up to this week?
Oh, man. So this week, really same as last week, man. Just getting ready for this competition. We are... For those of you that are powerlifters or strongmen, you know that as you get closer and closer to a competition, more and more fluff gets taken out of your programming. So what used to be maybe 30 or 40 minutes of the compound lift, whether it's squat day, bench press, overhead press, whatever, and then a series of accessories, now it's hour and a half of the compound movement. So today was deadlift, axle bar deadlift, and then very few accessories. So it's getting heavier and heavier and heavier, and the intensity is getting more and more and more. But that is the goal, so that you hit your numbers on competition day. So that has been taking up a lot of my time at work. Whole lot of new guidelines coming down with monkeypox and the monkeypox vaccine. So did a lot of time reviewing memos and training up coworkers, getting them up to speed on our new policies on that. So yeah, that's really about it. Work, lifting weights, and talking to pretty girls. That's really all my week's been. Really one pretty girl. Let's be real.
For me, just enjoying this cooler weather down here in Texas. We've gone from being in the consistent 105 to 110 every single day. And I spend the majority of my day outside. So just coming down to the mid 90s and no humidity, you get a little bit of a breeze. And this is a wonderful time of year down here in Texas. I mean, in the evenings and the early mornings, we're down in the low 60s. So it's nice and cool here. And that lasts through the morning. So right now, this is like the perfect weather to be just sitting outside, enjoying a beer, sitting around a fire, sitting out on the porch by yourself, contemplating life, praying, reading the Bible, whatever you like to do while you're outside in the evenings or early mornings. Right now is the perfect time for that here in Texas. It is absolutely beautiful. In fact, this was one of the reasons why I was so excited to move down here. Is this time of year, early spring, even through most of winter, the majority of the year is like this, where it is just absolutely gorgeous to be outside. As soon as that sun starts to go down and it starts to cool down a little bit, it is beautiful. But this last summer especially, has been a rough one. So really enjoying that, getting things set up. We built a shed a while back on the property. Now the weather's starting to cool down, like I just was saying. So we're getting outside a little bit more. We expanded the fence for the goats. And if any of you out there have goats, or go with just the Premier makes a really nice fence for moving around, for rotating your animals on your property. And for when we had the homestead up in Illinois, and when we moved down here, we were using a very high quality solar setup. And that just does not compare now to being set up to, we got that thing plugged right into the house now, and goats escaping, goats playing around by the fence is a thing of the past. That is not something we'll have to worry about anymore, as long as we keep that thing plugged in. So if that's something you're contemplating and thinking about, is switching from the solar, and even the high quality solar ones, boy, did we struggle with them. It was a constant battle to keep that ground functioning for us, or getting enough sunlight to keep that thing powered. But it seemed like didn't matter how hard we worked or what we tweaked or what we played around with those solar units, we were never able to get a consistent enough charge. And as soon as those goats would realize that could perhaps be worth their while to get through that fence or to push on through, they would do it. So this is a much, much improved setup for us at this point. So a while back, we got a couple of ducks and a guinea. So they are getting really close to the point where they should start laying eggs for us. So that's kind of cool. And just enjoying that kind of stuff. There's something about goats that I absolutely adore. I'm not exactly sure, Myles, what it is or why it is, but to me, it is so relaxing to go out there by them. And they're kind of like this strange combination of being a wild animal and being like a dog, because once they kind of know you and they kind of recognize you, they can pick you out. And if you regularly go over, and I'll find something, old vegetables or fruit in the fridge, right? And I'll take an apple out that's got a bad spot on there too. And I'll just take my knife, cut it up into pieces and feed those goats. So when they see me coming, they come right over. And just like I said, there's this strange wildness to them still, but at the same time, there's kind of this domesticated, I know you're giving me something I want, I'll come over by you. And so there's kind of this strange relationship there with these goats, and watching them and how they conduct themselves. In growing up, until we had goats, I guess I kind of thought that these type of animals like this really just had no personality, that just kind of were what they were. It's like when you go to the zoo and you see a lion, you wouldn't know one lion from the next lion. I'm sure the zookeepers and the scientists there know them by exactly what I'm talking about these goats, where you see they have their unique favorite things, the things that they like to do, the places that they like to spend their day, the things that they like to eat. But until you start to like really pay attention to these animals, you never see that. They're just kind of all the same. And so I'm enjoying these two little goats. And for those who have listened to me on podcasts in the past and heard of the struggles that we had with goats, this time we went with a lot smaller goats. We went with pygmy goats. So anybody can handle these little guys. So it's taken a lot of the pain away and made way for a lot more of just enjoying watching them, and having the opportunity to kind of goof around with them. And the male, as long as your hand is open underneath, he'll eat out of your hand. But the moment you kind of put your head up or your hand up over the top of his head, then he wants to headbutt your hand. So there's just little quirky things about him. So I'm enjoying it. I enjoy having these animals and watching the ducks swim around and watching how they conduct themselves in the little world that we're creating for them. And it's fun. It's enjoyable for me. And that's kind of, I guess, a little bit of what we're going to talk about in this episode today.
Well, I'm glad to hear, Joe, that you have moved from wanting to murder all of your goats to now wanting to snuggle them and be their best friend. Folks, he's not kidding. If you've listened to his really old Ever Vigilant podcasts, he had like entire tirades about how he had an episode about how he had to bury a goat, and I about died laughing. I was driving across the state to work, listening to it on the way to work. But yeah, Joe, and it's the same here weather-wise. Now, if you're from California, it's still 7 billion degrees outside, and you will spontaneously combust. But for those of us who are conservative and God-fearing folks, the desert is beautiful.
Yeah. And
this time of year, it's 60s, 70s in the morning, highs in the 80s. Before the podcast tonight, I sat outside and talked on the phone with a friend, and it was, I don't know, 72, 73 degrees outside by the gazebo. And for me, it always brings back memories of when I was overseas. How messed up is that, right? You join the Army to see the world, and they send you from one desert to another. But there would be such a stark contrast in temperature between day and night that you'd almost need like a jacket. You'd almost need like a jacket at night. But that's really what makes the Southwestern United States just such a beautiful place to live is, during the summer, it's miserable. But that tail end of summer, start rolling into September, that monsoon season rolls in. And my God, the evenings, it's so peaceful and cool and awesome. If you want to sit around and have a fire, if you want to have a barbecue and have some friends over, you couldn't do that in a lot of parts of the country this time of year. Certainly not in Illinois, certainly not up in Prescott. Up in Prescott right now, I think it's like 41 degrees. I don't think I'd want to be outside. Maybe a fire pit, but definitely not outside, hosting a barbecue or a party or anything.
Yeah, definitely a huge benefit to being down here as well as a huge benefit for the energy bills, right? Everybody's bills are skyrocketing, and it's looking to be, a rough winter for people, and was a rough summer for people. So to be able to just open up these windows and turn off the air conditioning and not have to worry at all about the heat makes a tremendous difference. And just to remind you, Myles, I had the last laugh with those goats. They were absolutely delicious. And we will get into that a little bit here in this episode.
I'm still mad you never sent me goat jerky. That was like part of the deal, man, but I'll forgive it. I'll forgive it.
They were delicious. There were some decent sized goats, and they were butchered just before we needed to leave. And so it was like basically every night for 2 weeks, goat every night, goat on the grill. And it was fantastic.
And, as a man who spent a decent chunk of his life as a young man in the Middle East, I am a connoisseur of goat. So don't knock it till you tried it, folks. It's actually not bad, especially if you prepare it the right way.
Yeah, it was delicious. A little bit of seasoning on that. It's amazing how delicious.
Little mesquite charcoal. Oh,
yep. It's amazing how delicious almost anything tastes that you make over charcoal.
Yeah, hands down. And then, like I said, I've gotten to enjoy some pretty interesting cuisine in my travels with the military and other jobs I've had after. And yeah, like I said, goat is one of those things that you think it's gross, right? Because, especially in the Middle East, you watch all these goats literally eating piles of garbage, dead fish, whatever. And you're like, you really going to feed me that? It's actually pretty damn good. Put it onto a skewer, put some lemon, some pepper, some sumac on it, throw it over some charcoal. It's delicious.
So that kind of brings us into the topic that we were going to talk about in this episode, Myles, and that's kind of the wisdom of preparedness, because both of us over the last couple of years gave up some pretty sweet setups to move and you to kind of move in a different direction in your life, and us to move in a different direction coming down here to Texas. And, just for me, we'll let you get into you in a minute, but for me, we had that property. We had 2.5 acres in Illinois where we had plenty of rain, plenty of good grass during the summer, a little creek that ran through that property during the rainy seasons, and, had a basement that was filled with preparedness food. And we had, 4 goats, and we had, probably at least 10 to a dozen chickens and geese and ducks roaming around the property, had planted fruit trees and had fruit bushes, and had, set up some different plots for where we knew we could grow things during the spring and summer and even into the fall in gardens. And we had been on that property for right around 4 years, which is kind of like that break-in mark, I would say. Between 4 and 5 years is when you finally are kind of adjusted to that piece of property and what plots really seem to work out, and where you can grow stuff, where you're getting enough shade, where you're getting enough water, where the soil is good enough. If you get ahead in the game and you plant some fruit trees and stuff early on, that's about the time where that stuff can finally start to produce even just a little bit for you, but at least you get to see some of the fruits of your labor. It's at that point where if you got chickens at year 2 or something like that, they're producing well with eggs. You're at that point where you're kind of more adjusted yourself to the changes that you've had to make. You understand what it's going to take, where you're buying feed, how much feed you're buying. You've kind of really gotten into a position where you've been able to adjust yourself to your piece of land, because it's easier to adjust yourself to that piece of land than it is to adjust that piece of land to you. And it takes you a little while to probably learn that lesson in and of itself, but also to learn just the different ins and outs of where you live and what are the benefits and what you can use and what you can't use, what you're fighting, which battles are not even worth fighting any longer. And we were kind of at that place there in Illinois where, once COVID started, rearing its ugly head, there was probably the time where I was looking at that property that we had there in Illinois and going, man, this is why, and this is what I had that piece of property set up for. We could disappear into that piece of property for a long time with very little outside influence on what we needed to do, if that's what we needed to do. And there were minimal times where I could look at that and say, man, we are not where we could have been because of choices that we made. And although when we moved down here, we were certain that this was the direction that God had pushed us in, and this is what we were to do, and we could feel confident in that, there was really never any regret in making that move, because there were also plenty of negatives to that piece of property that we're on. But at the same time, when you give something like that up, give up some of that security and some of the lessons that you've learned and move away from there, what you do take with you is the wisdom that you learned in that situation. And that's what I kind of wanted to talk with you about in this episode, Myles, is the lessons learned during that time you there with your property in Prescott, because the reality is you can't always take everything with you, and you can't always stay right where you're at. But what you have up here in your head and the experience that you've gone through and the wisdom that you've gained, that's invaluable. That's where the real value is. So we're going to kind of talk about that in the episode. Why don't you kind of share a little bit about what you had going on there in Prescott before you left?
Yeah, I was on similar size plot, a little over 3 acres. It was actually north of Prescott, north even of an area called Williamson Valley, for those that know northern Arizona. It was a mix of pineland and rolling plains, a lot of cattle land. And I did a lot to improve the property. I definitely made a killing when I sold it, much to my ex-wife's chagrin. But one of the first things I did was plant some fruit trees. And you had mentioned it takes a while for that to mature. And that's about as long as I was at that property, right at about the 4-year mark. I had to drop everything, sell everything, and move down here to Tucson. That is probably best a topic for another show. Not really ready to talk about the reasons for why I had to move down here yet, but that was a very difficult thing for me to do because those fruit trees were producing. I planted a couple of Fuji apple trees, some pear trees, cherry trees, which thankfully died. I don't like cherries. As my ex wanted those. But man, those apples off that tree were delicious. And then I had also done some irrigation lines and had planted a lot of really pretty shade trees along a big chunk of the property, some really nice cypress trees to kind of cut down on the wind and dust. And I built a nice barn that was all stocked up with, like you were saying, survival food. I had a couple pallets, Mountain House and MREs and pallets, other survival accoutrements. And then the next project was going to be to get chickens going. I'm a power lifter. I eat an obscene amount of eggs every day. Excuse me, folks. And certainly, eggs is a fantastic source of protein. But that was just enough time to really, like you're saying, learn where the sun hits the property the hardest, because I was getting ready to start drawing out planter boxes and start gardening projects. But after a couple of years, a couple of seasons, you get to learn, where does water flow through your property? Where does sun hit the hardest? Where's the most likely place you're going to be successful with sun-sensitive versus sun-hardened crops? Where do I want to put my chicken coop? I don't want to be walking across 3 acres in the snow to get eggs. If I want, and I was going to build it just across, because I had it cross fenced. There's an acre of it around my house that I had fenced in, and that was going to be an area for my kids to play in and cars to park, and the fruit trees and stuff are there. And then the back 2 acres, that's where I was going to put everything else. I was going to put the chicken coop inside that 1 acre block. And then, of course, allow them to run in the back because they love eating grasshoppers. And there's one thing we have in Arizona, and I know in Texas too, it's an obscene amount of grasshoppers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely learned a lot, and you're absolutely right. There's only so much you can control with that property. And, when you go to a realtor and you say, hey, pull up the flood maps, pull up this, pull up that, what's the history of the well? And then you get there and you realize, I didn't know that this well had extremely high levels of calcium, and I was going to have to spend $3,000 the first year I was here on a new hot water heater and a new well pump and a filter for the calcium particulate. I didn't know when I moved in there where the floods were going to be and that I was going to have to resurface the driveway every single year until I got gravel put down. So things that you learn, and the good thing is, you can homestead anywhere. Joe, you've already kind of restarted that process. All my funds have cleared escrow for my house up north, so I'm getting ready to go house hunting right now. I'm definitely looking forward to applying a lot of that wisdom to buying a piece of property out here. There's a lot of really nice land on the northwest side of Tucson, southeast area, up in the foothills, where you can get 1.5 to 2 acres and still be pretty self-sufficient. You plant a dozen fruit trees, raise some chickens, and a small garden. And if you can cooperate with some neighbors, you can be pretty self-sufficient.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main lessons there that you just mentioned, is getting to know some of the neighbors. It doesn't take long to realize realistically that being self-sufficient includes your neighbors and includes your friends in the area, because living solely off of what you can do and what you can produce and is kind of a pipe dream unless you're on a piece of property for 25 or 30 years. At that point, maybe you can get things to a point where you could be completely self-sufficient. As social creatures anyway, you are much better off contributing and working together with those that are around you versus trying to think that you're going to take on the world by yourself. And I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned coming out of the situation.
Oh, definitely. And, I'm going to just go ahead and say it. The concept of the lone wolf prepper is a bullshit concept. It looks cool in the movies, somebody walking all the way across the country with a memorized copy of the Bible in their head. What was that movie? That was a really great movie. The Book of Eli.
Yeah.
Oh, that was such a good movie, but it's not realistic, right? You're not going to be able to go out there. Well, okay, never say never, never say always, right? But you're not going to go find a turnkey homestead that's got a barn and a boot cabin and chicken coops and a pig pen and mature fruit trees and irrigation already done for you. And all you have to do is move in and, hey, by the way, the corn will be here this fall. It doesn't work that way. So,
and the reality is, Myles, even if you did move into a place like that and you were totally green, all you would do is screw it up.
Yeah,
somebody before you would have spent, again, they would have spent the 25 years there setting all that stuff up and putting you into a place to succeed, and you would utterly fall on your face.
You would kill every fruit tree by overwatering it. You would kill your chickens and your pigs.
They would die.
So, I mean, there's a learning curve to it. And the reality is community is huge. I've said on your show multiple times in the past, as well as other podcasts I've done, one of the things I really preach is the concept of a mutual assistance group, or a MAG. And ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the hiccups, the occasional belches. You can thank the U.S. Army for that and my no longer stock gastrointestinal system. This is what years of MREs does to you. Okay, let me circle back to what I was saying. So on the small scale, a mutual assistance group, okay, that could be your neighbors. Now, I got to know some of my neighbors pretty well. I had a neighbor that raised cattle, and I was able to trade personal training for his son, who was getting ready to go play football, JV football. And in exchange, I got some beef out of that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a food for food. It can be a skill or a mindset for food type of trade. But yeah, I had a sheriff's deputy that was a mechanic, and he was really handy with fixing stuff up and just general handyman stuff. He helped me a lot with fencing projects. He helped me cross fence the property and put some gates in. So on the small scale, your mutual assistance group doesn't have to be your group of doomsday buddies you've known for 20 years, right? Although that's another part of preparedness, is having a close group of friends and having a plan of what to do. And you've talked about how you're going to communicate, and, maybe you do group buys and save money on bulk food or ammunition or whatever. But on the small scale, you still have to know your neighbors. You have to know your area. You're going to be relying on each other at a minimum for security if anything really bad ever did happen in this country. And then in the meantime, like I said, it's kind of nice to be able to get half a cow shoved into my freezer for teaching some kid how to deadlift. It's not too bad of a deal.
Yeah, exactly. And this is intentionally to break apart the whole boomer and doomer concept and idea of what this is all about, because it's not all about yourself. It's not all about being the lone soldier. It's not all about taking over a Walmart so you can have a Walmart to yourself. This is realistic. And the more skills that you can have and the more knowledge you can have up in the noggin is where really everything matters. When we came down here to Texas, I didn't think that we would probably ever do the homestead again. I thought that we would probably be in the suburbs, and that was part of letting go of everything when we moved down here. Was what does the future hold? Where will we be? What's going to happen? What do we have? What can we rely on? And that's what taking a step of faith is. That's what moving outside of your comfort zone and what you have personally built and think that goes out the window. And when we came down here with the mindset of, hey, let's see what happens. I figured that once my wife and kids got into a suburb situation, that the homestead thing would be part of the past and something that we look back on, looked at pictures, laughed about, and told stories about. And we weren't here long before that urge to get back into a piece of property, get back on some land, get back into some animals started to come back out of everybody. And everybody decided that, hey, you know what? Let's do this again. But we could do it again now from a completely different vantage point. I'll never forget, Myles. And this has a lot to do with the whole bug in, bug out situation and breaking these myths of this is always what you want to do, or this is the best thing to do. There is no best thing to do. The best thing to do is what serves you and your family the best in that moment. At that moment, you need to make a decision. And when that moment comes, whether it be a wildfire or tornado or hurricane or whatever it is, or the end, like we talked about in that first episode, the end of the world as you know it. When those situations come your way, you need to take the data that you have and make the best situation. It's got to be a no regrets. We decided that's what we needed to do, and then you move forward from there. And what you take with you in your head and what you've learned and what you've experienced is of way more value than that pallet of Mountain House or this or of that. The skill and the ability to make friends, the skill and the ability to speak with people, the skills, the soft skills, as they call them, to negotiate, to sell, are just as valuable as thinking that you're going to have some bunker that you're going to go hide in to ride out whatever it is that's coming your way. It's just such naive thinking. At one point, I took all of our food stores was the first thing that went into the trailer to move down here to Texas. That was my mindset. That was the priority. And I loaded that stuff up into the bottom of the trailer, loaded up all the rest of our possessions because that's all we took down here was my F-250, the back of my F-250 loaded up, and a 12-foot trailer. That was it. All our possessions in the whole world fit in there. That stuff, to me, was number one. The first time I got that truck loaded up, closed up that back of that trailer and drove down the road, and it was very apparent right away that that trailer was overloaded, and there was no way that I could make it across the country loaded up like that. And then I had to contemplate and think through what it was that I was going to take out of that truck. What was I willing to give up? What was I willing to sacrifice in order to get where I needed to go? And that came down to getting rid of a lot of the food stores that I placed so much faith in. And I unloaded that truck at probably like 10 o'clock at night, had to unload that whole trailer by myself, get down to those food stores, sort through that, was able to get my brother-in-law to take some of the stuff down to Texas when he came. And then I spent probably an hour and a half opening up Mylar bags that I had packed so diligently and so nicely into those bins and dumping it around the property that night so that we could make sure that we passed the final inspection that next morning to sell our house and that the trailer would be sufficiently unloaded. And that took a lot and was a gigantic step of faith to move on from that point. But it was the true lesson that it's not all these stores. It's not that boomer doomer. Let's just pile up MREs, pile up supplies, pile up this, buy this, click that, buy this, go into debt for that. All of that stuff is a bad way to go about this whole idea of preparedness. Use your head, learn from your experiences, and then move forward in the smartest way that you possibly can from your knowledge at that moment.
Yeah, and I can also relate to that. I looked at the back of that U-Haul and I said to myself, I've got my home gym equipment and I've got my food storage. Which one is going to be harder to replace, right? And obviously, I chose the power rack and 2,000 pounds of steel and my power bar, and kind of did the same thing. A lot of the bucketed stuff I dumped out. I did save the more expensive stuff like the Mountain House meals and stuff, but once you know how to store up your own food, and once I get into a new house, it's going to be no big deal. I can get some more Mylar bags and I can rebuild that again. It's not the end of the world. And folks, we're not trying to say that storing food is a bad idea, but what we're trying to say here is that, what's the old expression, right? Don't put all your eggs into one basket. Yeah. If you are the most prepared person in the world in the aspect of having, 1 million rounds of 5.56 and, 20 years of freeze-dried food, but you are 300 pounds overweight, or you've never trained with that rifle that you have all that ammunition for, or you've over-prioritized in one area of prepping and your medical preparedness isn't up to speed, or even something more basic like your mental preparedness, your spiritual preparedness aren't being addressed. Having an experience where you have to kind of turn tail and run and really prioritize what does and doesn't matter and what can and can't be replaced, that does a lot to mature you as a prepper. It does a lot to kind of break you free from that mold of as you call it, that boomer man. Exactly. That's where we're at. So sorry, folks, technical difficulties as we're trying to figure out the most efficient way to record this podcast for you guys. Look, we're not saying that it's bad to store food and ammunition and things that you do need to survive and provide for your family. Quite the contrary. I mean, biblically, I believe there's even a call to do that. But what we're saying here is when you flat out put all of your faith in a pallet of MREs or a pallet of ammo cans, and your physical fitness isn't where it needs to be, and your spiritual and mental fitness aren't where they need to be, and you're not developing a plan with your family and developing a plan with your community and your friends, that pallet of MREs isn't going to do you very good in the end of the day, is it?
Exactly, Myles. That is exactly the point. It's not, you can be so married to what you have set up or what you have built that you are afraid to take opportunities that come your way, or afraid to get out of Dodge when that's the best thing for you and your family, or you and your friends, or however that may end up at that moment. And you need to be able to make those situations without being married to something that is not as important as health and wellness and where you are in your life with your relationships. So that those are probably the biggest lessons that I learned, giving up so much and in putting so much faith in things that at the end of the day, we've been down here in Texas for 3 years, and that food storage would not have made one lick of difference to us. You know, at that point, it's just dead weight. And it goes into the same mentality then, and the same thoughts of gigantic bug out bags and what is realistically necessary, and what lessons then you can learn, and the strengths of having the freedom to go where you need to go and to do what you need to do, versus being tied down to ideas, or being tied down to certain possessions, or being tied down to a piece of property that may not be the best for you in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you've got to be flexible in your life. You can't be afraid to avoid a career opportunity, or a move closer to family, or life interference X or Y or Z.
Yep.
And you hit the nail on the head right there. You know, I'm in the middle of house hunting right now. Do you think I really give a shit that I don't have 20 buckets of white rice and beans right now? What's that going to do for me right now? And like I said, at the end of the day, it ain't going to be that difficult once I get settled in, and I'm able to just pack up a couple more later. Is food storage an important part of being prepared? Yeah, absolutely. But again, folks, it can't be everything. You know, I laugh, and we all fell into it. We all did it, Joe. Don't tell me you didn't too. We all laughed. You just mentioned it right there, the giant bug out bag. You know, when I was in the Army, even on like long range operations, I'd be living out of a small assault pack. Now, granted, we did carry MREs and stuff with us in the truck, but at the end of the day, poncho and a poncho liner to sleep under, water filter, S-bit stove with some trioxane fuel tabs. I didn't have a 94-piece survival shovel. You know, I didn't have
whistle,
58 ways to start fire. What's up?
Or a whistle with a compass on it. And
I did have a whistle, but no compass. Yeah. And a hatchet. Yeah. a hatchet that doubles as an egg fryer. I don't know.
And
There's
compass.
so many just stupid products out there. And, that's one thing I'm glad I've matured in as a prepper is learning to read through the bullshit Facebook ads. This flashlight is softer than the footsteps of a Navy SEAL, made of the same material as an SR-71 Blackbird. So it's made of aluminum and titanium. Cool, dude. But they hype it up so much, right? Like, oh, check out this holster that looks ridiculous, but this guy uses it. He was a Marine. You should use it too. You see right through the bullshit and you're like, what's the point? Like, I have a decent holster that does just fine, and I've had it for 9 years and it works, and I train with it, unlike you idiots that are buying this stuff and don't train with it.
Well, and I did a whole episode a while back, and if any of you that are listening to this are just kind of breaking into preparedness or trying to understand what this means and what this means for you and what it means for you moving forward, it was a good episode. And basically it boiled down to not doing things out of fear. And that's really what all of this comes down to. And I think my greatest lessons and the greatest things that I have learned through this process of kind of starting over is to try to do things that are the best things to do at that given time, taking everything into consideration that I can versus doing things out of fear and getting careless in the things that I do or where money is spent, because there are so many things that will eat up all of your money really, really quickly that it's just complete nonsense that you'll never use, that will just end up in some cardboard box, either up in the attic or in the basement or in the garage, that you'll constantly trip over. And some of these things become more of a hazard because they'll fall out of the attic or you trip over them. And now you got hurt because you bought this hatchet that doubles as an egg scrambler and compass. So the smarter we can be and the better decisions that you can make moving forward. So what is, you're kind of in a spot, you're a few paces behind where I am, Myles, as far as getting settled into a new place and what that looks like and stuff. What for you, as you look at it, are going to be your priorities? Where do you feel like you're set, and how were you set in those areas that you were able to move forward? What were the most important things, I guess, that you'd made sure that you took with you? And then what will be the steps that you take once you get settled into your place from the lessons that you've learned?
So obviously I kept my guns, because what Arizonan gets rid of a gun, right? And I kept about half my food storage. Like I said, the more expensive stuff. I did the exact same thing you did. Ripped open the Mylar bags. I saved the buckets. You can reuse those. But all my gym equipment came with me. I'm going to actually use that and hopefully, probably in the spring, open up a commercial gym and make some money off of it. And if not, I'll just have a pretty badass man cave with a full cage power rack and calibrated competition plates so I can just train at home. But as far as like the most important stuff that I'm glad I kept, my guns, obviously, my books, I had a lot of like really good survival and preparedness oriented books. Had a really nice like steam bath canner and pressure canner. I kept those. Obviously all my kids stuff too, that came down. Yeah. But really, I mean, the biggest thing I took from it is everything I learned about trying to build a homestead from scratch and what I'm looking for in a property moving forward. You can read about it in a book all day long. Oh, you want northern exposure for solar, and you want to learn the wind patterns of your property and learn the flood patterns. Until you actually walk a couple of acres and then start scaling that in a notebook and start drawing it up, it's really meaningless information. Well, it's good information, but without application, it's not very good. And the mindset and the knowledge of that and learning about where you should be planting your fruit trees versus non-edible trees, where you should be directing water. If there's flooding on your property, what can you do about it? Can you direct it somewhere? Can you turn it into a pond, whatever? But definitely all of the like logistical and engineering stuff I learned about having a homestead, I'm really looking forward to applying that to a new piece of property. Because I know you kind of did the same thing when you moved down to Texas, is you took some of those, like you took the good stuff you learned, and you also took some of those hard lessons or irritating lessons, and you applied them to your new property. And I'm really eagerly looking forward to doing the same thing myself.
Yeah, and I think it just shows a lot that when you started rattling through the things that were priorities to take with you, how minimal that list really is. You know, your kit, your more expensive stuff, some of your food stores, but at the end of the day, it does not compare at all to what so many are storing up and, you know, putting all their faith and reliance in. And I would say the same thing. I took basically the same thing, took guns and took my kit and, you know, took some of my medical stuff and probably a little bit less than half of the, you know, food preps. You made a big transition too, as far as like climate. And that's probably our biggest challenge right now, is trying to understand this property and understand this climate a little bit more. And that's going to take some time. What does irrigation look like? What seasons can you really grow things in? You know, it's becomes quickly apparent you really have two growing seasons, because you got spring and you got fall. But during the summer, you're going to really struggle to keep adequate irrigation on most things that you want to grow, unless you are providing enough shade. And again, that falls into, you know, are there trees on your property? What are the options to grow trees? So all of these things fall into your knowledge then and your growth and what you think you can accomplish. Because no matter, like you're saying, even if you found some turnkey piece of property that was like super magic, you probably would end up destroying it and ruining most of it in the first couple of years. So no matter what, there's such a learning curve to that part of it that you really can't put a ton of reliance in it. Because when you start to put that stress of that reliance in that, it takes away the joy and the fun part of that. And you've got to be receiving some, like I'm talking about those goats early in this episode. And for those that don't have animals like that, maybe that rambling sounds a little strange, but the reality is, if you are not enjoying, if you do not receive joy out of spending time with the animals and watching what they do, seeing how different plants and different trees grow on your piece of property, seeing what the water does, seeing what areas are shaded, seeing where things grow. If you don't enjoy that part of it, you are really going to struggle. And if you are putting yourself in a position where you're full of stress on, I have to do this in this amount of time, and you start putting timelines on stuff, you are really going to struggle. And once that enjoyment goes away and everything becomes work, you really put yourself in a very, very, very tough spot.
Boy, I tell you, you talk about things you learn and things you take with you. I definitely learned I'm going to hire people to do a lot of that labor.
Yeah.
You know, having a homestead, it sounds very romantic, but you're right. If you don't have a love for what you're doing, you're not going to be successful at it. Yeah. And again, of all the things I took with me, it was that knowledge, and it was everything I had to learn. You know, the one upside to moving back down here is I did grow up in Tucson, so I'm kind of familiar with the climate, and there are a lot of really good resources locally that can give me some good information on growing. So again, folks, let's circle back here briefly on relying on other people and how you just can't do it on your own. One of the first things I did when I moved up into Prescott is I went around to all the nurseries, and I said, what's the best type of tree I can grow? I want something that doesn't require a lot of water, grows quickly, is going to provide a nice wind and sun break. And they all said the Arizona white cypress. So I planted a ton of that around the property. Mm-hmm. And then I did the same thing. I went to like local preparedness meetings, and like our church did like a canning event once a month. Hey, what type of tomatoes grow well? What type of peppers grow well? What are you growing? And I'm starting to do the same thing down here in Tucson as I'm researching what varieties grow well here. Obviously, any kind of pepper is going to grow really well in the desert. But, the other stuff like different tomato varieties, tomatoes are a hard thing to grow. People don't realize anybody can grow the little like cherry tomatoes for a salad. Anybody can grow that, but like a real beefsteak aroma tomato, something beefy that you can like throw in a hamburger or, make into a ketchup or a pasta sauce to can up, that takes skill. And that's where really that knowledge of being brave enough to go out and ask questions and meet people and go to their gardens and see how they did it is a lot more important than a bucket of pasta. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And these are the types of things that people love to talk about, Myles. If somebody is successful at growing tomatoes or is successful at growing something on their property, or they've seen success, they want to tell everybody, right? Because other people in this world could care less if they can go to the store and buy something. They don't understand, like you're just talking about, how difficult it is to grow something like that in Arizona. Other people don't care. So if you show just even a little bit of interest in how they've done what they've done and give them the praise that they deserve for the efforts that they've put in, and you know what you'll leave with? You'll leave with a small envelope full of seeds and knowledge that you could not buy, that you could not watch, that you would never be able to find someplace else than somebody local and what they know. It's interesting. I was reading something not that long ago and was talking about epigenetics and how seeds pass on information. So when you replant, every time that you replant seeds that grew on your own property or in your local area, every time that you do that, they succeed a little bit more because they pass on information about drought, or they pass on information about predators and different kinds of insects or whatever that attack during different times. And they pass that on through that seed to the next generation, and the next generation to the next generation. There's a lot of crazy stuff that we don't know and we don't understand. And we just want to go buy a new pack of seeds for 49 cents every spring there at Tractor Supply. But there's a lot more that can go into that. And then that knowledge is just priceless. And I think that's the two biggest lessons I learned is that, number one, it doesn't matter, or I should say, number one, the fear has got to go. You cannot do anything out of fear. You have to do things with the right mind set, and you have to do things with your mind in the right place to make the best decisions. You cannot do things out of fear. And number two is, it doesn't matter how many YouTube videos you watch, just what you were saying earlier. It doesn't matter how many YouTube videos you've watched. It doesn't matter how many books you've read. It doesn't matter how many online courses you've taken. Nothing trumps experience. And the only way to gain experience is one day at a time. One day at a time. And that's invaluable. And those are the lessons learned, just like last time with the goats. What did we do? We went to a much, much smaller goat. It's much more manageable. We're not having problems with them escaping. We can still use them for milk. We can still use them for meat if we got pressed in that area, but it gives us the opportunity. We start with two. They're easy to work with, easy to manipulate. And now when they reproduce, we have even better control over that next generation and the following generation and the following generation of how things are maintained, how we operate, how they work best on our property, how they take care of our property the best. And this, even that, for some people, the whole idea of goats and maybe even chickens is way out there. You're in an apartment or you're in a small subdivision with a townhouse or something, and these are things that are on your distant future, or something that you dream about, or something that you talk about with your significant other of where you want to go down the line. Don't let that discourage you from making plans and from thinking things out, from enjoying those YouTube videos. And remember, they're more of entertainment. Just keep that in mind. but enjoy the heck out of them and support those that are making them too. Enjoy those courses or those books that you're reading. Support those people for taking the time and effort that they have to build those things. But just remember, there is no substitute for experience. So what does that mean? Start small where you're at. Start growing some tomatoes on your balcony, or start a small garden in your backyard, or start some fruit trees in some buckets, knowing full well that, yeah, I'm going to start this thing. I'm going to baby this thing sitting here on my patio for the next 3 years. And hopefully in 3 or 4 years, I'll be taking this bucket and putting it in the back of the truck and bringing it out to my new property. Start those plans now. Start getting involved now. Start learning this process and start learning how these things work while you can enjoy it and not out of a place of fear.
I don't really think I have anything else to say on top of that, man. I mean, it's always be working on your mindset. Always be working on building up your knowledge. You're always going to have that with you. And I did the same thing. You know, before I moved up and I got that homestead, I lived in a tract neighborhood with, you know, houses on top of houses with a crappy little backyard. But I still learned how to do container gardening. And I had some zucchini plants and cucumber and little salsa garden with some tomatoes and peppers and other stuff. Do what you can. Try and learn, apply that knowledge, build on it. And then if homesteading really is like a long-term goal, everything you can do now, even if it is watching these videos and taking notes and sketching out ideas in your head and starting small with some small gardening projects. I laugh, Joe, when I see all these like survival seed vaults for sale. Like, good for you. You have an ammo can full of seeds. Have you ever planted a seed and let it grow and produce for you?
Heck yeah, get out there and do stuff. That's the problem, is too many people sitting in front of their computer watching YouTube videos instead of outside in their backyard planting stuff. There's a guy, I think he's up in Canada, and you know what? I think he's sprouted off, and now there's people all over in Canada and the United States that they make their living now planting gardens in other people's yards. And part of the deal is they plant a garden in that guy's yard. They get part of the proceeds out of that garden to sell at the farmer's market. And the person whose property it is, they get the vegetables and fruits that they need for their family. So it benefits everybody, benefits the community because the community is getting fresh organic food grown in their community from the farmer's market. It benefits this guy who absolutely loves to garden and gets to go from house to house and enjoys his time with these people, enjoys his time at the farmer's market. And he's fully self-supported himself and supports those families that are lending out chunks of their property. And these aren't like big properties. These are just suburban backyards. So there are opportunities out there, but you need to make them. And there's no limit to what you can do, but you got to get started and got to get out and do it. I mean, it's a beautiful thing once you break past that point. You know, I see it a lot of times in people, and, you know, they talk about the 10,000 hours, Myles, and becoming a master of something. And you see that in people because you no longer are contemplating and trying to figure out a lot of it. You're outside of that awkward position where you're not sure what to do. And now you enter into a phase where you can enjoy it because you're not trying to learn everything, and everything isn't frustrating, and everything isn't trying to figure something new out. And then you get to enjoy things. And you see it, whether it be a musician, where you see some musicians that just make it look easy. Because there's no longer any thought going into music theory. There's no longer any thought going into the discipline, or am I doing this correctly? Or is somebody going to hear this like this? No, it's total freedom because there's enough confidence and enough mastery of that instrument. Or I see it all the time with guys in the trades where they make things look easy that are just not easy, but they've got so many hours invested into doing these things, and they do such a phenomenal job that they make it look simple. And they get to that point where they're no longer thinking about work. They're no longer thinking about doing it the right way or this rule or the best way to do it. busting everybody's balls and laughing and joking all day long. And they don't even think about work. And it comes to a point where then it is fun. It is enjoyable, and you can enjoy what you're doing. And that's the benefit of experience. So the more experience you can get in whatever it is, go get that experience.
Go get some experience, and don't allow your living situation to limit that. It doesn't take, what is it for a ham radio technician's license? I got it a long time ago. I think I spent $30 for my tech, right? Go find a local radio club, go hang out with those guys. Much like Joe was saying, you go talk to your neighbor about tomatoes, and not only are you going to leave with an envelope full of seeds, I'm also going to add, you're more than likely going to leave with the foundations of a really good friendship with that neighbor. It's the same thing. Ham radio guys are cool. They're nerdy old dudes, and they love their radios, and they love teaching about their radios. You don't have to be on a couple acres in the woods to go to a ham radio class, or to go to a Stop the Bleed class, or an advanced combat medical class, or to take a bushcrafting class. Expand that knowledge, expand that skill set. Like, good for you. You bought an IFAC. Thank you for your purchase at archangeldynamics.com. But do you know how to use, shameless self-promotion, do you know how to use everything in that kit? Have you ever put hands on? I'm sure you've seen tons of YouTube videos about tourniquet application. Have you actually done it?
No, exactly, Myles. And that goes a long, long way. Go out, experience stuff, figure things out, learn as much as you possibly can. And that I think is the benefit of our experience, of your experience there in near Prescott, and my experience there in Illinois on that piece of property was the knowledge that we gained there, so that we could move forward and do this again someplace else. Then it no longer matters where you're at. It matters the knowledge that you took with you opens up doors that otherwise wouldn't be opened up.
100%. And then you can, over time, learning these skills and mastering these skills, get to a point where you can then mentor and share that knowledge with others. It all comes full circle.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if these are things, and along the way too, it's important to get family involved and get buy-in from other people in your community and from your family, but get started, get going on it. That's I think my biggest lessons. So anything else you want to share? Any other thoughts, Myles?
Not really. I mean, this, of all the podcasts we've done, this has actually been, I think, one of the ones I've really enjoyed the most. And I know you can definitely relate. When you walk away from something that you've built for a few years, there's a lot of sting.
Yeah. A
lot of sting, and you bleed, you sweat, you cry to build that, and then you have to walk away from it. But again, I'm trying to have that attitude of, hey, I have this great opportunity now where I can do it again with a hell of a lot more knowledge and experience behind me. And that's really kind of the purpose of this Zulu Alpha project here is, again, we're not saying cool guy shit is useless. We both like guns and knives and cool packs, and I get it. But what's really going to lead your family and lead your community through some cataclysmic event? Is it going to be your 51-piece Boy Scout egg beater hatchet, or is it going to be years of knowledge and training and practice and honing your skills and really kind of pruning away the unnecessary crap to really bring a premium product?
Yeah, exactly. Again, I think a tremendous focus on the soft skills can never be overvalued. I mean, that is definitely the way to go, is to put a lot of focus on that. So with that, we'll quit kicking this dead horse, and we will be back with another episode very soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. Thanks for being there for this podcast. And you can find Myles on Instagram at
That's a call sign _ snake doctor. It's predominantly just videos of a big dumb meathead lifting heavy things up and putting them back down. You can also find my small business at Archangel Dynamics LLC if you're interested in primarily medical preparedness topics, as well as purchasing some medical supplies for your family. You can check us out there as well. And Joe, where can we find you at?
You can find me at Prepare.Defend.Lead on Instagram, and you can find the Zulu Alpha information about this podcast at Zulu Alpha _actual. So go check out those Instagram pages and let us know what your thoughts are on this. Have you had to give up things? What are the biggest lessons that you have learned in preparedness and getting through situations, big moves, big life changes? And how did you cope? What was important to you? What did you leave behind? And we'll keep this conversation going there on Instagram.
Tell you what, before we go, Joe, feel free to slap me because I just pulled this out of my butt. Let's have our first competition. Those of you that are listening to this podcast, I want you to find the funniest preparedness-oriented meme that you can and send it to the Instagram page, and Joe and I are going to vote on it. And we will send the winner a sticker pack, like a little swag pack. How's that sound, Joe?
I love it.
Let's do it. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, let's do it. And then we'll post it up at Zulu Alpha _actual. And whether it's like an ad for a product that just is like,
yeah, or just a ridiculous product ad. Yeah.
Yeah. Freaking hilarious product ad or something that we can post up on Zulu Alpha _actual, or whether it's a great preparedness meme and whoever does the best, and we post it. And even if it ends up being a couple people, we'll make up something for you guys. We'll get something out to you. Love it.
Absolutely. I definitely want to be very interactive with our listeners. I think maybe on the next show, Joe, we'll talk a little bit more about the Patreon tiers and what people can get by buying into that. Part of that is getting to see the video of us two bearded idiots talking back and forth. So anyway, Joe, I'll let you take it from here to close the show. I've had a great time BSing with you for the past hour and a half, and I'm really hoping that those who are listening took some value from this, because if anything, it's been cathartic and enjoyable for me.
Yeah, this is a conversation I think that's very near and dear to us, something really, really personal, actually. We can kind of talk about it as if it's just a theory, but in reality, this is something that hit us both right in the cojones for completely different reasons and different situations, but it stings nonetheless. You know, with this podcast here, before I close it out, really this podcast, I want to just be like, we pulled up a couple of stools at the tiki bar, and you can hear the waves lapping in the background and maybe some tiki torches around. And Myles and I are just BSing about the day, BSing about what we think, what we've learned about preparedness and whatever topic it is for that. And we want you to feel like you're pulling up a stool. This conversation is just going to be a conversation. We do discuss and talk through these topics a little bit beforehand, but we also want this conversation to just seem natural, just seem like a couple of friends sitting down and talking about things and concerns that are going on in our life, lessons learned, and funny things that have happened or gone on. So we're glad to have you along, sitting at the bar stool next to us. Glad to have you along from the ride, and we'll keep producing this podcast, and we'll keep moving forward with Zulu Alpha. And like Myles said, we really want you guys to get involved. We really want to hear what you guys are thinking, what you guys are learning. And if you guys have topics or ideas for this podcast, please share them, throw out those ideas for us. And as we move forward, we'll touch on those topics, and we'll learn from you guys as much as you guys are learning from us. So absolutely blast sitting here on a Saturday night with Myles. Thanks again for dropping by, and we will sign out now.
Oh, well, that was fun.